Hey, this is Mr. Spencer. We're talking about a poem, The Emperor of Ice Cream by Wallace Stevens. All right, we have this on our poem bank, and this is for Friday by midnight, February 12th. You need to post your annotation on perusal.com. Sound good? Let's read the poem first, see if we can make any sense of this. This was published in 1954 by Wallace Stevens, The Emperor of Ice Cream. Call the roller of big cigars, the muscular one, and bid him whip in kitchen cups concupiscent curds. Let the wenches dawdle in such dress as they are used to wear, and let the boys bring flowers in last month's newspapers. Let B be finale of scene. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. Take from the dresser of deal, lacking the 3 glass knobs, that sheet on which she embroidered fantails once, and spread it so as to cover her face. If her horny feet protrude, they come to show how cold she is and dumb. Let the lamp affix its beam. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. What do you do with this poem? What kind of annotation can you make on perusal? Now remember, we have this Poetic Devices glossary here we can look through. Picture a Haley Steinfeld. She was from a new Apple TV show called Dickinson, where she plays famous poet Emily Dickinson. Is there any alliteration? I think so. Is there any anaphora? Well, I think there's repetition, but anaphora is repeating a certain word or phrase at the beginning of successive lines, like in this Martin Luther King speech. So I know there's definitely repetition in the poem. I'm not sure if there's anaphora. Okay, and this Poetic Devices glossary has literally dozens of different poetic devices that you could look at. And some of them are similar to things you've done in 6th, 7th, 8th grade. Some of them are very advanced for advanced placement literature. Okay, so as we look through it, I read it out loud because I want you to get a sense of the rhythm, especially in lines like kitchen cups, concupiscent curds. Okay, the rhythm of a line like that, and noticing where the conscious measure and the pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables might add significance to certain words. Okay, so you can look through this and find other examples of Poetic Devices glossary to include on perusal. Let's walk through some of the poem with you together, okay? The Emperor of Ice Cream, a command of acceptance. Poetic devices you'll see in these slides. Diction, syntax, enjambment, repetition, alliteration, connotation, imagery, rhyme, symbolism, irony, tone shift, theme. These are things you might notice. And of course, I remind you the same thing I put on the front of the poem bank. We did this with Conveying Meaning Through Tone with Fitzgerald and Raymond Carver. The best literary elements to explore in any text, especially poetry. Poetry is how you work out your muscles and really improve your language skills. So these are ones you always want to come back to, all right? Mr. Spencer's top 5. But these are more general terms. You can find more specific interactions of each of these terms if you look through there. The Emperor of Ice Cream, written by Wallace Stevens. He was born in Reading, Pennsylvania in 1879. Does this historical context help you understand the poem any better? He went to Harvard, worked as a reporter and a lawyer before becoming vice president of the Harvard Accident Indemnity Company. So working in insurance, accident and indemnity, life insurance. Does he work with life and death in a business sense? He published poems as a side hustle, and he died in 1955. Okay, when was the poem published? Do you remember? The poem was published in 1954, near the end of his life. His philosophical thoughts and writing style, the main topic, the relationship between reality and poetry, that's what he wanted to focus on in his writing. Or think of it as the relationship between nature and imagination, the natural world around us and everything that goes on in our head here. Wallace Stevens believed in 2 kinds of reality: the objective reality And the perceptions by the five senses, sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, and the subject of reality, depending on the subject, you, the interpreter. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. That would be the mental world dominated by imagination to arrange the chaotic information from sensual perception. His poetic ideals, he focused primarily with the following: how the imagination can transform the ordinary, use our brain to transform the way we look at the world. Supreme fiction, he wanted to center the imagination on reality, okay? Create a supremacy or a hierarchy of how we process reality piece by piece. What's at the top of that power chain and what's at the bottom of that power chain. He argued that religion is a man-made construction, and he also argued that poets contain a higher power, a supreme power than the normal man. And he felt that poetry itself can take the place of religion. You might think certain holy texts are like poetry in themselves. Okay, so let's continue this. I thought the picture of a young Wallace Stevens, though, to me, he looks a little bit like Todd from Dead Poet Society. You see the resemblance? Come on, guys, are you with me? Pay attention here. Historical context. Let's look at this. The poem was published in 1954. We know Wallace was growing up in the early 1900s, and unlike their predecessors, the realists, the romantics before, the capital M modernists in the early 1900s were generally pessimists. A picture like this might say, like, this is the reality of the world. They saw the world as chaotic, unstable, and futile. This is not unlike the realists that came before them. Ernest Hemingway, born in the age of realism. They also saw that religion, as well as morals, were lost. Often these modern poets with a capital M felt confused about their place in the world. So how does this tie into the Emperor of Ice Cream? Well, let's just look at the modernist period a little bit. Okay, we've got major writers like T.S. Eliot, Robert Frost, Wallace Stevens, who we're studying here. Influenced by diversity, new immigration in the early 1900s, industrial revolution, the growth of cities, and World War I. We're focusing on this from an American perspective because Wallace Stevens was born in Pennsylvania. He's an American. And the capital M modernist American movement was a reflection of what American life was like in the 20th century. This reflection, if it was a mirror, was cracked and fractured, though. Okay, so we look at this time period that Wallace was most heavily associated with. You could even think of this poem as moving into postmodernism. It was published in 1954. And it represented the struggle of challenging beliefs with new ideas. So the previous beliefs previous generations had, challenging with new modern ideas. It started at a time where literature could look like anything and where literature traditions were being broken. And we can start to see experimentation with gender roles, introduction to racial issues. But this experimentation with subject matter and form is a heavy, heavy idea of modernism. Experimentation and a broken, fractured reflection of life. So, modernism. Don't forget, we'd also have F. Scott Fitzgerald thrown into that time period. Remember this AP poetry strategy? We did a little bit of this with Anne Bradstreet. Okay, verses upon the burning of our house. TPC, ASTT, TP cast. Title, paraphrase, connotation, attitude, shift, title, and theme. All right. Curtis Abendroth's older brother, Jason Abendroth, told me 3 years ago another way he could remember this acronym was TPCASTT. He remembered it through true poets can always synthesize the theme. So you could try this with any of your poems or for perusal. Maybe for the perusal annotation, pick one of these to focus on that another classmate hasn't already done. The title of the poem, let's look at this, okay? TPCASTT. Start with the title, your first thing, and we'll come back and re-examine the title later after we've done some other work. The Emperor of Ice Cream. Perhaps it shows that the reader sometimes, the commonplace items of life, the everyday items, ice cream, they can be transcendent. They can accentuate reality instead of mask it. Okay, do you have the poem in front of you? Okay, look at it as we go through these slides. It's a strange poem. And there's only about 40 or 50 word choices here that we have to work with. How did these word choices help us understand the meaning behind it? Accentuate reality rather than mask it? Well, what are we masking? What is the poem about? Look at connotation, all right? You can paraphrase it like you did with the Groundhog poem, beginning, middle, and end. What's the story? But it's very difficult with this poem. So TPC, Connotation. Connotation is the subject or emotional undercurrent or associations that certain words carry. This is distinct and different from denotation, which is the agreed upon dictionary definition. Okay, denotation. You do this with word within the word vocabulary. You look up the dictionary definition. Connotation is like the subtext, the underlying undercurrent, kind of below the surface that you feel, you associate with other ideas and other words, and your neural network in your brain also makes connections. Okay, connotations involve feelings and emotions, so they are more subjective to the reader's own personal experience. Look at that picture of an emperor there. What's the connotation of a word like emperor? Culturally, though emperors are often associated with grand luxury, opulence, or showing off, emperors are decorated with ornate costumes and accessories. I mean, look at that picture there. That guy must be heavy to walk around in that. Their power often is symbolized through golden ideas, crowns, thrones, scepters in many cultures. And Wallace Stevens is an American poet, and immediately the reader must accept that there are no official emperors in American government. And we don't have emperors in America. So what does that mean for us? Fix that, Mr. Spencer. Okay. American emperors. Stevens is an American poet. Emperors are an old world idea. Stick with me. They represent tradition, monarchies, or even outdated modes of ruling power from a modern American perspective. So that could be like, okay, we look at other European, Russian, British forms of government, and Americans might think that's old traditions that are outdated with this Republican democracy that we try to put forth in our country, this great grand experiment of democracy, a democratic republic. Furthermore, emperors are meant to be in control. While the subject of the poem, The Emperor of Ice Cream, seems to concern a sudden death. Did you notice in the second stanza? Somebody died. Who? Are their feet sticking out? Why is there a sheet over their body? Sudden deaths are, by their nature, hard to control. How can humans properly gain a sense of control in order to something as chaotic as sudden death? How do we gain control? How do we gain power over our lives when it seems so random and chaotic? Our life can be taken from us at any moment. At a funeral or a wake, for instance, when humans try to regain some sense of order or control over a life after a death, refreshments and desserts are often served. Ice cream is one traditional and modern dessert that one might find at a funeral or wake. Who is in charge of distributing the ice cream? Who is the emperor of ice cream? Okay. A wake is usually where you get together at somebody's house after a funeral, or maybe at the funeral home. It's where refreshments are served. The funeral is more formal. The wake is usually more informal. Okay. And I hope you've never been to one, but inevitably in life, you will go to funerals and wakes. How important in the grand scheme of things is the person at the wake who evenly distributes the ice cream? Okay, look at that soft serve. How is it ironic that the poem highlights the absurdity, not just of those in charge of handing out refreshments after a funeral, but of any human who tries to make sense of death? And how does one comfort others when those close to us die suddenly? How do we regain power or agency in such vulnerable times? How do we do it? Let's try to paraphrase this, all right? Stanza number 1. Call the roller of big cigars. All right, call that big muscular guy. He rolls the cigars. Tell him to crank that ice cream machine. Bid him whip up in the kitchen some curds of ice cream. Whip it up. Get that ice cream machine out. Okay, in the early 1900s, you might know this. It's at places like a Dairy Queen or a Baskin Robbins. It's a machine that might produce like a soft serve cream. Okay, let's get that out. Bid 'em, whipping up concupiscent curds. Let the wenches dawdle in such dress. Wenches, often a female word with a negative connotation. Let the maids sit in the kitchen and flirt with the boys. What kind of maids are these? Are these promiscuous women? Are they flirtatious females? Let them sit in there and flirt with those boys. The boys will bring flowers in last month's newspapers. Why? The yard boys, the gardeners, the ones that work around the house, let them bring those flowers in. If they're gardening outside, they bring the flowers, they wrap them up in newspapers. Why? Well, there might be thorns. You might want to bring flowers in at a funeral or a wake. They're wrapped up. And let be finale of scene. My way to paraphrase this, I don't know. Let everything be let it be, let it be. Paul McCartney sang from the Beatles. But then be and be is repeated. What is the significance of this repetition? The way things seem, the finale of seem, let everything be as it should. As it should. Let the way things appear, the way they seem, the way they appear. Just let the way it is be. It's the most common verb in the English language, to be. We'll study Hamlet next month. There's a phrase in that where he goes, to be or not to be. That is the question. This is probably the most difficult line in all of American poetry, but it's maybe most simplified there. But the more I oversimplify it, the less meaning it has. I don't want to oversimplify complexity too much. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. Maybe that means the only beauty is in reality. So stanza 2, we go to the next section. Take the dresser of deal. Get the death sheet that she's made out of the cheap dresser that's missing the 3 knobs. Cover her face. She had embroidered fantails once. Spread that sheet over to cover her face. She's a dead corpse. And if her horny feet protrude, is there double connotation there? Well, maybe she's got horns or bunions on her feet, her calloused feet. The sheet's too small, her feet poke out the top. Maybe she's a 6-foot-tall woman that died. It's no big deal if her feet stick out because she's dead. Okay, dumb often was associated with an old school phrase, deaf and dumb. Dumb meant mute or quiet in a lot of those old school contexts. Let the lamp affix its beam. Get that light just right. Are we talking about literal or figurative light? And then, wait, go back. I was just trying to read. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. The beauty of life lies in its reality. Possible interpretations. The first stanza might deal with the sexual nature of man, the big muscular man, the cigars. What's the shape? Even though someone is dead in the other room, the man is still rolling cigars. The girls are still flirting with those yard boys. The boys still come and go. There's social dramas going on here, flirtations, intermixings. And the second stanza deals with the inevitability of death. It's inevitable. The poor woman, so poor she had to make her own funeral sheet. She made a covering that does not fit. Instead of allowing her face to show, we see her horny feet. And it doesn't matter, though, because she's dead. Death is a part of life. That's one way to look at it. You might interpret the poem slightly differently, but this is my best interpretation. Maybe it helps you. There's rhyme, end rhyme at the end of the lines. Okay, come, dumb, seem, cream, beam, cream. You'll see that in the poem. End rhyming. It suggests maybe Stevens did not want the poem to seem absurdist, but he wanted it to be grounded in reality. It also causes the speed of the meter to increase and call attention to the theme. It's inevitable that we will die. And these are all ending in masculine rhymes. Masculine means the rhyming is at the end of the line, the end of the words. That's called masculine. Feminine rhymes might be near the middle of the words, internal rhyme. And that might show masculine how he commanded the audience to accept life. Okay? These types of terms are sort of politically incorrect, but end rhymes are often considered masculine in an old school poetic tradition, while internal rhymes in the middle of words are considered feminine. Okay, anyway. Alliteration, you see all the examples of words that have letters at the beginning that repeat the same sound, you see? It's almost like interpreting each one of these, a smooth, breathy sound or a harsh staccato sound. There's purpose between each of these. And the alliteration gives the poem a silly or a playful sound, which suggests how the imagination complements reality. You complete me. Okay, what others? Imagery. It centers on a wake after a funeral. The speaker of the poem's attending the wake of an old woman. The neighbors are gathering and treating it as if it were a party. Cigars, flirtations, ice cream. The images presented are all ordinary. They either represent sex or decay, life or death. Okay, what other poetic devices can we find? Enjambment. You'll find this in your Poetic Devices glossary. It's where you have the line of a poem ends, but the sentence it's in does not end. So for instance, the second line, bid him whip, that's not the end of the meaning of this line. The sentence continues, in kitchen cups, pubescent curds, Peter Pepper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Anyway, enjambment. Whip in. These words are connected. Enjambment is when the poet stops the end of a line for meter purposes, for syntax purposes, but the sentence and the meaning of the sentence continues into the next line. Okay, that's called enjambment. There's also repetition, like words like be and be, words like emperor, and words like ice cream being repeated, emphasizing the central ideas of the poem. And there's possible symbolism in that beam of light, the reality of the situation, or light and knowledge shining on the reality of death, a spotlight on reality, for instance. Diction and syntax you might look at. The poem's written, I would say, in a slightly elevated or heightened diction. Words such as concupiscent demand an astute reader. Elevated, almost sophisticated, maybe overly sophisticated with word choices like that. And the poem's written as a series of commands. Let be, let. Notice the word let is repeated in the middle and the end of the poem, commanding you to do something. The speaker of the poem might be the organizer of the wake, and he takes command of the situation. Do this, do that, bring the flowers in, let be, finale of scene. The attitude, the tone, well, because it's written as a series of commands, the attitude is one of authority and resolve. Do this, do this, do this. We're making decisions. Resolve. And the speaker orders the others and has resolved the fact that the woman is dead. He's dealt with it. Have you dealt with it? Shifts in the poem. The punctuation determines the rhythm and lends itself to the tone, and that is commanding, and points to the emphasized parts are set with periods. So when you look at the poem, always notice the punctuation, the periods. You're supposed to take an extra pause there, and they might emphasize the words that come right before them, okay? The crux of the poem is the line, the only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. It's 15 syllables, and it ends in a decisive end rhyme, okay? Ice cream rhymes with seam at the end of the poem, rhymes with beam, a decisive masculine end rhyme. And these are the only two stanzas. One focuses on sex and the other on death. These are the two inevitabilities of life. Okay. Theme, last slide. Possible. I'm not too assertive here. I want you to come up with your own idea. But one possible theme of the poem is to accept the realities of death and life. One must accept and celebrate the present, despite its absurdities. I'm curious to see what annotation you will put on perusal. All right. You go to perusal.com or app.perusal.com. You should already have your login information. Okay, we've done this previously with the Crucible and Raymond Carver's Cathedral, and we're doing the AP Poem Bank 21. This is Mr. Spencer, signing off.